Theology Unplugged.
Welcome to Theology Unplugged. I'm Michael Patton, and this is number 26 of our Through Theology in a Year Theology Unplugged special session. I'm trying to get through all of theology in a year. We'll see what happens. It may take 2 years, may take 3 years, but we're taking it slow, okay? One piece at a time. This is part of the theology program. The theology program is a full 60-session course of theology, system of theology, whole program, theology program. Real creative name, huh? But the theology program, 60 sessions of theology. You can get that at credocourses.com. You'll find the entire thing. Just search the theology program, not a theology program, not theology program, but this is the definite article one. And search for that in Credo Courses. You'll be able to find lots of available ways to get it. You can get the workbooks too, and you can take people through this. You take Sunday school class through this, take your church through this. We've had thousands of churches over the last 20 years use the theology program. It was shot in 2001 to 2006. We shot all 6 courses at Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas, where I was a pastor at the time. And so we've got some really good videos. They're not high definition videos, but they still look really good. I mean, I don't think they're dated too much, except for one time whenever I have one of these big old flip phones and I'm wearing it on the side. I don't know why I was doing that. Big, huge flip phone too. I think it was 2001, so you'll see that. That's good. But other than that, it's not dated. As I go through this, as we're going through this right now, in this Through Theology in a Year, essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking all of that material and I'm slowing way down, updating it when it needs to be updated. But, who needs to update theology? Theology doesn't need to be updated if we are right about theology. However, having said that, there is the culture that we have to engage with, that it is changing. We've been talking about that the last few times, and we're going to continue to talk about that today. Postmodern theology. Support, number one. Okay, look at that. I got that up there this time. It worked. So you can take a picture of that, I guess. I don't know how you do it, or you can just go to patreon.com/C Michael Patton, and you'll see the community that we have there. You'll see everything's available. If you become a monthly contributor, you get this stuff for free. Just look at the different levels you have. There's lots of different levels to choose from. This is how I make my living. If this is something you enjoy, if it's something you appreciate, if it's something you feel like God is using, that would be great if you could support me. But I really do. I appreciate you showing up. That is so fun. I mean, I'm so blessed to be able to do this for as long as I have, the way that I have, and being able to just focus on theology. That's what I focus on. It's a primary thing. Doesn't mean I don't focus on application, doesn't mean I don't focus on practicality, because theology is immensely practical. But I would love to have you join our community over there, check it out, see what you think. Got a good community. Like I said, I don't know, 200 or 300 people. It's a good sized community. I blog there often. I have been writing for the last 20 plus years as well. I've got over 3,000 or 4,000 blogs, but just in the last 2 years at the Patreon, I think I have posted 600 blogs. So that's a good place to go. Good place to check out. I would love to have your support. That's what I'm asking for. Love to have your support. Thank you so much. Let's get started. We are continuing today to talk about the postmodern mind. That's primarily the thing that I want us to dig into. I know we've already done it. This is number 3 on postmodernism, but we're trying to understand why it is that our culture today is so different than it used to be. What is changing so fast, and how do we as Christians engage this and do it responsibly, do it in a way that is effective? I mean, we want to be as effective as possible. We want to be we want to understand where people are coming from. And a lot of us, this is the way we are. We empathize and we understand. That's why I'm talking today mainly about empathy. I want you to empathize and understand why people think the way they do. Now, we've started each session, these last few sessions, talking about how different the culture is compared to, say, 1990 to 1950. I mean, just a change in mindset that is going on. And we had a transition from modernism, which is people who are more willing to discuss the reality of truth and trying to find truth with you, to a postmodernism, to where it's not that truth doesn't exist. I don't want to misrepresent postmoderns. Postmoderns are people who believe they most of them do, especially in the academic world, especially those people who have taught in the 1960s that really gave rise to postmodernism. None of them would say there's no such thing as truth. And so it's often a misconception to say this culture today doesn't believe in truth. I know a lot of people don't, and I know a lot of people would think they don't, but in the end, most people do. We all recognize that. Whenever you say there's no such thing as truth, of course, that's a self-defeating statement. How can you have no such thing as truth if that's not truth? And if it is truth, then it defeats the statement. Kind of like my wife has never been married. That's a self-defeating statement. And so most people today would never claim to, they wouldn't say, I don't believe in truth. There's no such thing as truth. What they would do is they would say, I don't think we can be sure or certain or have sometimes any degree of confidence that our view of truth is the correct view of truth. And so it's not that truth doesn't exist. It's just that how in the world could we ever find truth? How do we know that truth is actually available to us, that we can acquire it in our minds, articulate it well, and believe in it rightly? That's the postmodern mind. So therefore, it's your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. We're talking about this in this course, this section that we've been going through called Prolamina. Prolamina is the prologue to theology, the things you have to know before you study theology. I know that this feels very academic to some of you. I don't want it not to feel academic, but I don't want you to feel like you cannot engage with it because it's academic. I want you to understand that this is something that I am doing everything I can to take one step at a time. And so if you're joining us for the first time, please don't get scared off by this. Yes, we are going to deal with big topics. Yes, we are going to go very deep into these topics. And yes, we're going to be using words sometimes like prolegomena and postmodernism and epistemology. But those things all have relevance. I don't say them because I want any of you guys just to sound smart. I want you to be smart. I want you to take the gifts of God's world, one of those is language, and be able to acquire it and use it in such a way that is effective. And language is something that you articulate in your mind every time you think of something. The more articulate, the more precise you can be with things, the better off you're going to be. Now, you don't have to do this all the time, but we need to pause sometimes. And this is just 30 minutes to an hour a day. Pause and let's really engage our mind. Let's put our thinking caps on. I'm not going to dumb anything down. That's not what I'm here for. It's not what God put me on the earth for. I believe every one of you that's listening to this, I truly do. I believe you're incredibly smart. And I believe that most of you don't give yourself enough credit. You don't see yourself the way God sees you. You don't see yourself as inheritors of God's image, at least with regard to this kind of stuff. But God has given us the gift of knowledge, the gift of understanding. He says, let the person who rejoice in this, that he understands and knows me. And I do believe there's a way we can understand not only God, but the world we live in, and filter it through a system of theology, filter it through a responsible way of doing theology, that we can in the end not only be confident and dispel so many doubts that we may have in ourselves, but in other people, because we live in a world right now that is floundering. They are a ship at sea without an anchor. Truth is that anchor, but if you pull that up, you're just floating, and it's a scary thing. This world is a scary world. Every time we move into something new, every couple of years, there's something massive that comes out that you see is just completely changing our world. I don't want you to get scared of it. This is the world that God created. He's not scared. He's not up there on his throne shaking his hand saying, what is the world doing? I can't believe it's becoming this. I can't even engage with these people anymore. No, he's got a plan. He is sovereign. He's on the throne. And this is what I want us to be confident in, that as we move into the new world, we can engage it, even though it's changing fast, even though it's different, even though we're scared. It is scary. We like what we already know. We don't like what is the unknown. And sometimes this kind of knowledge, this kind of stuff is the unknown. But I want you to get used to displaying God's image in such a way to where you're excited about this kind of stuff. You're excited when we talk about academics. You're excited when you learn a new word every day. That is something that is, why do we ever stop? Why would we ever stop? It's part of the greatest things in life is to learn, is to understand, is to know, to enjoy, based upon a knowledge that is as accurate as we can be. I know that this is a long preamble to this, but I know the way people think sometimes, and I know how scary it can be, and I know how irrelevant sometimes this can be. And some of you are saying, just, tell me about Jesus. Well, this is telling you about Jesus. All of this is subduing the world that God created. This is being responsible stewards of not only ourselves, but of creation. And this is part of creation. So we move into culture, and we're asking the question, what has become of our culture? We have moved into a postmodern world where, here's postmodern. Let me put it this way. Postmodern epistemology, postmodern, the way they come to know, postmoderns started around, notice here, you've got the modern generation, the last of the modern generation is the pre-boomers and the boomers. And they make up about 25% of the population today. And I just updated these statistics, so they're as right as they can be, or as close enough. And then the postmodern generation, which makes up Gen X, which is me, Gen Y, and Gen Z. However, you might put the Gen X, like me, my generation, if you're 40 and above, up to 50, 60 years old, you're going to have the Gen X generation be a transition generation between modernism and postmodernism. But for the most part, we live in a postmodern world. For the most part, 75% of the people who are alive today on the earth would qualify as part of a postmodern generation. It's a new generation. It's different. Okay, let's move on to right here. Let's get some characteristics. I think this will be very helpful for you in understanding what postmodernism is by comparing it to modernism. I know we've already done this. I know we've already done the stage of truth, but just hang with me. This is going to be you're going to like this. Okay, so the modern generation primarily focused on intellectualism. I'm not saying everybody. I'm just saying primarily that was something that could characterize the modern generation. Rationality or reason would be the primary focus of the modern generation. Optimism, hope for the future, what it is that humanity can become, what it is that humanity is, what it is that we're evolving into. That's the idea here, whether it's real evolution, macroevolution, evolution of science, or just evolving of a culture, evolving of a species in our growth. So you got optimism, you got hope for the future. We're going to change the world, Everything's going to get better. That's the modern mindset. Objectivism. Truth is objective. Truth is something you and I are working to acquire. We are looking outside of ourselves, not inside of ourselves for truth, but outside of ourselves in order to find that truth so that our minds and our thoughts can comport with reality. So to the degree that I can accurately think, represent, and articulate reality is the degree that I have acquired truth. Objectivism, truth is an object out there, not subjective inside me. Exclusivism, well, there's one truth. We're in the hunt for this one truth. We're not looking for many truths. We're looking for the exclusive truth, and we are working our way towards it. Science is getting there. Scientific method is something that God has given to us so that we can move forward in our search for truth. So that is kind of the way. Oh, wait. Man is evolving. I already said that. Man is evolving, whether it's, like I said, evolving as a species or just evolving as a society, evolving as a person. We're getting better. That is the mindset of the modern generation from which we are coming. You might say, I like that. That's a good one. I wish we could get back to that. And again, a lot of us, whenever postmodernism introduced itself in lower culture in the 1960s, broadly speaking, the 1990s, you really saw the change. You noticed it, you watched it go on. That's the first time you started saying something is really changing with regard to people's mindsets. Now we can see it every day, but like I said, 75% of the people are born into this. They know nothing else. So this kind of thinking here is something that is rarely known and thought of today. Okay, what does postmodernism look like? Well, postmodernism, let's see here. You've got the anti-intellectual. So beforehand, it was intellectual. Now it's anti-intellectual. And I don't want you to get the wrong idea about that because I can misrepresent that. I don't mean they're dumb. Postmoderns are not dumb by any stretch. As a matter of fact, in some ways, the thinking today is in humility. Now that's the wrong way to put it. I don't know if humility is the best way. It could be. Because basically you have a right assessment of yourself. You begin to assess yourself and you say, I don't have all of these abilities that I had before, or I fail, or we trip up in every single one of these areas. And intellectualism has led us in a wrong direction. It has gotten us world wars. It has gotten us the nuclear bomb. It has pushed us in such a way to where we thought we were going to cure hunger, and we're not even close to it. The world's just getting worse and worse. So therefore, anti-intellectualism is not that they're dumb, it's that they don't believe in the intellect the way the modernists did. Okay. Beforehand, it was reason, now it's feeling, emotions. Why? Because we're turning inward. Each individual is turning inward. We're turning inward as a culture, as a society. When we look for truth, ultimately, it's not as if we believe that we're going to be able to find some objective reality outside ourselves and be sure about it. Therefore, the most important thing is what you believe. Okay, pessimism. Optimism beforehand, pessimism. As I said last time, this is often been called the age of despair. That doesn't sound good, the age of despair, the pessimism of today, but it is. It is very pessimistic from the standpoint of man's ability, man's role, our understanding of ourselves. It's pessimistic. It just don't have a lot of hope. Now, as a Christian, you may look at that and you say, pessimism. I mean, would you rather walk into a room of people who are very optimistic about themselves and share the gospel, or people who were pessimistic about themselves? Somebody who thought they didn't have any needs, or somebody who you walked in and they're like, I'm in need of something. We are lacking something. Somebody who is had all kinds of hope in themselves, in humanity, or people who had an assessment of humanity that said, humanity's messed up. We've seen the history. We see what goes on. We're a worldwide culture now. We have access to the entire world now, and we can see what's going on. And let me tell you something, it's not good. Which one would you rather come into and share the gospel with? You see, it's not so easy, because the modern generation, if they did not have any need, how are you going to fill that need with Christ? If they don't see themselves as broken, how are you going to show how Christ, the God-man, came and on the cross represents us and fixes our brokenness and gives us new representation? If you don't need new representation, why do I need somebody new? I represent myself. You see, this is the way you got to think of it as well. You got to think of it not only as which seems better, which seems smarter, which seems cooler, which the modernist probably would, but which has a more correct assessment of themselves subjectively, of humanity subjectively. So, pessimism, despair, hope for the future, despair for the present. Again, objectivism, which simply means truth is an objective reality outside of myself. Subjectivism and relativism is that truth is inside of me. Truth is inside of my culture. Truth out there, objective. Truth in here, subjective, relative. That is postmodern, more subjective, more turning inward. Okay, exclusivism beforehand with the modernism, because there is a truth out there. There's only one truth. There's not many truths. But in postmodernism, you have more of a pluralism, an inclusivism. Pluralism being this idea that there are many different ways to the same goal. Remember, way back a few sessions ago, we talked about how postmoderns are more prone to have a pragmatic approach to the future. Let's just do whatever it takes to get us where we need to go. And that is the right way. So many ways to the same place. Many roads lead to Rome. That is the pluralism. Inclusivism basically says, well, we'll talk about inclusivism and separate that out later whenever we talk about how this relates to specifically Christianity. Okay, and man, distrust in science. Now, here's the deal. Whenever I put this up here, I don't want you to get the wrong idea as well. It's not as if we don't live in a scientific generation. We do. It's very technologically scientific. It's very, very precise in a lot of ways as we use science to move forward. But in this case, we're not so much using science in postmodernism to search for the truth, because the truth is a treasure out there we're looking to find, but because we use science in order to obtain whatever it ends that we are trying to obtain. And it's not the objective reality. It's the subjective change in humanity as a species. It's who we are, who we can become, who we should become, not who God has us to be so much, but how inside of ourselves we feel at the time. So a distrust in science is think of it this way. Whenever you hear some new scientific theory that comes out, and this is the way I am. I mean, I live in a postmodern world as well. I've gone through this change. I understand it. I understand the confusion that you can have. I understand whenever you turn on the internet, whenever you begin to Google things, whenever you begin to look at AI and you say, ask questions, and then all of a sudden there's just such a broad knowledge base out there, I begin to feel smaller and smaller and smaller. I begin to say, golly, I didn't know as much as I did before. And then whenever a new scientific theory comes out, I'm like, yeah, maybe, because it's going to change. Pluto used to be a planet. It's no longer a planet. The food pyramid used to be a pyramid. Now it's a plate. I don't know what it's become. Everything that used to be bad for you, saturated fats and bacon, that was the worst thing for you, and eggs, of course, and the egg yolk. You still got the vestiges of modernism at the grocery store. You go there and you find those little cartons that have just egg whites. That's modernistic. Egg yolks, postmodernistic. No, I mean, it just changes. It's like now egg yolks are the best. It's a superfood. You know that, right? Egg yolks are a superfood. Bacon is good for you. Animal fat is good for you. Yeah, it may have changed since I heard it last. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad bacon became good for you. And I do like egg yolks. I'd rather take out the egg whites and just buy egg yolks. Much, much better. Much more tasty. But, that's the change. We don't know what's true anymore. We don't know what's good for us. We don't know what causes cancer. We don't know. Whatever we discover, we figure will change. And if you figure that, you are empathizing with the postmodern mind because everything is dislodged. We are out at sea and we do not have the anchors we had before. Those anchors were comfortable. Right now, we're scared. We don't know where we're going. All we know is we don't want to be naive like we were before and think everything is going to work out to this utopia that the modernistic world presented to us on a plate and said, this is coming. It's not coming. That's the idea. It's not coming. Okay, so distrust in science, man is evolving, man is devolving. Now, I want you to take that relatively speaking as well. Of course, that's a good old postmodern world to take man is devolving, relatively speaking. It's not as if there's not science out there. It's not as if people don't believe in evolution. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying beforehand, man was evolving as an objective fact. That's what people believed. I don't necessarily believe in that, but that is what science said. Now we look inside of ourselves and we look at culture. We look at the history of humanity. We see that we are not evolving like we thought. We're devolving. We're becoming worse. That is the big picture overview. Now, here's my favorite overview. And if you're listening to this is for you, my man. Because me and Jason are Trekkies. If you're a Trekkie, you're going to have no idea what I'm talking about. I don't even know. Star Trek, no. We've got new Star Treks that are coming out all the time right now, and they're actually very popular. But I'm from the generation of the original Star Trek, right? And the next generation, which I rebelled against at first in the late 80s and 90s, but it was the greatest. The next generation was the greatest. But you had the original Star Trek, and you had a guy on there named Spock. Remember Spock? Have you ever known Spock? You've got to know Spock if you're a part of our culture, please just go back and watch Spock. I mean, everybody's got to know Spock. He represents something. He really does. He represents something that I grew up with, that I grew up into, that we have now begun to move out very quickly. Spock is this. Spock is the ideal modern man. Think about it. Spock represents the ideal modern man. He represents all that we were supposed to become. He represents all that modernism believed about humanity. You see, Spock was someone who was always logical and objective. I mean, it just seems funny watching him now because it's almost a slight on his character whenever he's always just looking for logic. You look down on him a little bit because we're a little bit postmodern. And we just like, logic alone, come on. But at first, here's Spock. It doesn't matter what you think, what you believe. Unless, if it's illogical, it is wrong. That's the idea. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying we live in a different culture. Spock is the ideal modern man. He would never act upon feelings, ever, because that would be illogical. Remember, that's what we loved about Spock. He always had the objective answer. He always could disconnect himself from the situation. He was always emotionless. He couldn't have emotions because Vulcans, they many years back realized how and this is important, Vulcans many years, that's what Spock was. He was a Vulcan. He was a different race. That's why he has pointy ears, see? But Spock was a Vulcan, and many, many years ago, centuries ago, before Spock, the Vulcans went through a time where they had World War, and everything fell apart on Vulcan. Why did they do that? Because they were not because Vulcans, you may think this, Vulcans are not, they do have emotion. As a matter of fact, they have more emotion than any other species. And that's why they had to change. That's why they had to get rid and divest themselves from very training early on. Once you're born, you are trained as a Vulcan not to have emotions because it messes everything up. This is the ideal modern man. Get rid of all emotions, get rid of all vestige of looking inside yourself, and let's find the truth out there because that's what is best. Physical laws simply cannot be ignored. Existence cannot be without them. These are quotes from Spock. I looked these up. Pain is a thing of the mind. The mind can be controlled. Okay, notice here. This is objective, pure objective, rational stuff. Spock is the ideal modern man. Now, what do we have? Remember whenever I said 1960s, kind of the academic world started changing into the postmodernism. This is how it always happens. It starts in academia and then it moves to the culture about 30 years later. Well, that's exactly what happened. The 1990s, you have the new Spock. He on the Next Generation, Star Trek The Next Generation comes out, and the person they have represented Spock is Data. Now, Data is the ideal modern man mocked. Okay, it's not the ideal postmodern man, but it's the transition. Data represents the transition that our culture went through in the 90s to become what we are today, and he's a perfect representation. He is exactly the way we were feeling as a culture at the time. Gene Roddenberry was a genius to be able to see this and read this and to make these changes within Star Trek. And what is Data? Well, Data is actually the perfect man. Why? Because he's robot. He's machine. He is absolutely 100% objective. He doesn't even know how. I mean, Spock over there, he had to fight back and be trained not to use his feelings. And he does. He's good at it. But Data here, he doesn't have to be trained. He's built for this. He's built to be the modern man. However, and this is the key, despite his perfection, Data wants to be human. He rebels against logic, and he attempts to develop emotions and feelings throughout the entire series. That's all he wants. Data is the perfect modern man, and he hates being that modern man. He doesn't want to be. Why? Because it's not right? No, Data doesn't. That's not it. It's not Data says, you know what? I think it's better to be based on emotions and have emotions. It's just that he wants them. The other side, logic, is so cold, so broken to Data. I would rather, and remember a few times he inserts a emotion into his brain, and Data becomes a different person. But it's just funny to see Data striving to have emotion, striving to understand jokes, striving to understand the subjectivity of humanity, striving to understand how it is individuals not see life on the outside, but how they experience it on the inside. That is the transition. That is the change. That is something you have to be able to see. I do think Star Trek is a great representation. Now, I'm not saying that anybody knows these. You'd have to go back and watch the series, but just trust me on this. I tried to think of something in the newer Star Treks that help us, but I don't watch those enough. They're too... no, some of them are really good. I mean, like the newest one that came out, but some of them are just not so good. I'm not going to take sides on this. Get all the Trekkies mad at me. And by the way, I am a Star Wars guy as well, and I actually do like Star Wars more from the emotional standpoint, but I think Star Trek is a little bit cooler. The concepts are cooler. They're deeper. The thoughts they went into that. Star Wars is fantasy. It's not sci-fi. It's fantasy. Doesn't take place in a real world. Star Trek, however, is sci-fi, and so it's imagining what we become, and so it's more, I think, more imaginative. Okay, so what are we doing here? How do we look at this as we end our class session today on Through the Theology in a Year? Well, look at it from an umpire standpoint. Umpire, he's calling the balls and strikes. And the umpire says this, if he's a pre-modern, before modernism, we're going all the way back, before the 1600s, says there are balls and there are strikes, and I call them as they are. So in a sense, just kind of a very naive understanding that we have truth, period. That's pre-modern. Whatever I grew up believing, whatever my church teaches me, whatever authority out there teaches me, it is automatically true, and we don't even question it. They just are what they are. There's balls and there's strikes, and I call them as they are. The modern comes in and says, there's balls and there's strikes, and I call them as I see them, or as I engage with them, as I measure them. So the modernist comes in and says, well, we're not going to be quite that naive, but we're going to study it until we can figure out what makes balls and strikes, and then we'll make an assessment off that. And then what does the postmodern say? They ain't nothing till I call them. So there's no such thing. Balls and strikes, they exist in my mind, in my emotions. So they don't even exist. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Just the three different ways. Very creative. I think it was Stanley Grintz that I got that from in one of his books, but did a great job, great work on postmodernism. He was a great kind of empathetic postmodern theologian that I respected quite a bit within evangelicalism. We're going to move on and see how this affects the church. We're gonna look at this and say, how is the church dealing with this change? What reactions do different churches have? And you'll be able to see very clearly how it is. We're scrambling. Even as a church, we kind of feel like our anchor's up because we don't know how to engage this. We don't know how to measure the change. We don't know which side of anybody to serve. And we're going to get into all that. But this is so important within theology. This is so important within introduction to theology, the prologue to theology. I hope you guys see this because I don't know that we can really just automatically engage in theology. We have to understand why and how, and what's our views. What is the final goal we're trying to accomplish? Is there balls and there strikes, and we're just gonna somebody define what those balls and strikes are, or are we gonna learn what makes balls and what makes strikes, or are we just gonna say, hey, listen, let's all admit it's purely subjective? That is something you cannot just automatically choose at the beginning. We have to know why. So therefore, Prolegomena, this particular session, what we've talked about today, the balls and the strikes, are something we can't assume. That is why I spend so much time on this. That's why Introduction to Theology, as I've said before, the subject of Prolegomena, I've said this many, many times in many different ways, is the most important subject, not because it is objectively the most important subject, but because subjectively it is the most important subject. So not in a modern sense, but in a postmodern sense. It is what we are in. We are in a postmodern world, and you cannot expect to truly engage this generation, especially me. I'm 52, or 51. I don't know how old I am. Somewhere right around there. And I can't assume my modern upbringing or my postmodern upbringing. I have to evaluate them and understand what God has done throughout history, with the history of knowledge, with the history of epistemology. Where is he leading us? And we're going to keep on going through that for the next few times. We still got a while to go just on epistemology. And we're going to transition into understanding Christian epistemology We're finishing up right now postmodern epistemology, postmodern how do you know, Christian epistemology, Christian how you know is what we're talking about. Next, what is the Christian view of truth? We already know what the postmodern view of truth is. Let's talk about the Christian view of truth. Okay, guys, listen, I hope you guys enjoyed this session. I hope it was beneficial for you. I hope I even came through. Sometimes I don't even know if I came through because I don't know how to read this. I think I see a bunch of people in the room. Yeah, it looks like it. I mean, if that's right, if you're coming to us on YouTube or Spotify or podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever you're coming to us from, subscribe and comment. Those are the key things you can do. If you're on Apple or Spotify, give us a review. Give a review. That's really important. Are the reviews for the algorithm? Share this video that you're watching right now. I will have this edited and up on YouTube in almost no time, so you can get it that way as well. Subscribe to the series. If you go to YouTube, you go to Credo House on YouTube, search for Credo House, you will find this. Subscribe to Credo House, and then subscribe to this particular playlist called Through Theology in a Year. If you're coming to us on any other platform, podcast platform, it's under Theology Unplugged. Theology Unplugged is the podcast we've been doing since 2005. This is a series of Theology Unplugged. So, and we try to be as unplugged as we can, you know. I try to be truly unplugged. And you know why? You know why I called it Theology Unplugged, honestly? Because it's the unplugged conversation that I saw not only attractive to myself, but attractive in a postmodern world. The plugged-in conversation doesn't seem to be working quite so much anymore, because the postmodern will come up to you, and if you're all plugged in, you got all the answers, there's balls and there's strikes, and you call them as they are, they'll pat you on the head and they'll say, nice, naive Christian. Nice, naive Christian. Yes, you think you know, but we know better. You don't really know what you think you know. So unplugged is saying, hey, let's consider them all. Subscribe, comment, do whatever it is that you do. And also don't forget, check me out on Patreon. Okay, this is where you can find everything. Keep updated. I post these after I edit them from YouTube. I post them on Patreon. I got my blog on Patreon. That's the way to keep up. And most importantly for me and my family, this is the way I get supported. So if you feel that this is blessing you, please consider supporting. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. I really, really do appreciate you showing up each time, or just this time, and considering maybe digging deep each day like this in Through Theology in a Year on Theology Unplugged. Have a good day.